Okay, well, hi everyone. Thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartree back with you today with another episode of Presenting Champions, and today joined by Muay Thai fighter Seth Grande, who has some incredible stories to tell us from his career in this incredible and beautiful martial art form from Thailand. We are currently connected across the world from Cyprus, where I'm at, to Thailand, where Seth is at. So, a journey around the world today, as always, with my interviews, we'll be talking about the fight stories, everything from the big names that Seth has fought, including Saenchai, but many others. We'll be talking about his transition, I should say, from the USA to Thailand. We'll be talking about mindset, and we'll be talking about what separates the best from the rest. As always, guys, Seth will have some great tips to share with us about how to fulfill your dreams in life, how to make the most of your potential, whether that's in fighting or whether that's in something else altogether. There'll be some great tips there. So excited to have this man on the show. Stay tuned, everybody. Sorry if I sound a little bit weird as well. I'm just getting over the flu as well. But Seth, thank you very much for coming on the show, and thank you very, very much for taking time out of your evening to make this podcast happen. Basically, I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
Oh, of course, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries at all. No worries at all. So, one of the things that I'm going to talk about with you is obviously I don't always start at the beginning with all of my guests. Sometimes we start with the present day and things, but I think going back in time, getting a little bit of a feel for where you're from, and if sports was always part of your life growing up, or if it's a part of your life that started later. Let's start there a little bit because also lead into your transition to living in Thailand and everything. But starting off with where you're from, please, man, that would be awesome.
Yeah, man. So I was born and raised in SeaTac, Washington. It's just outside of Seattle. It's where the airport is. And yeah, I mean, sports were always part of my life growing up. Um, Both my parents played sports, especially my dad. My dad was like a pretty accomplished and active athlete, playing like football, like soccer, um, mostly. But my parents had me start playing sports like young. I don't know, like 5, 6 years old. Started playing baseball, basketball, soccer. Um, but baseball is the one that really stuck, like good American boy. And I played that for up until like high school. And then I got into wrestling, which is kind of where my like I guess combat sports like journey really kind of started. So I got really like enamored with wrestling in high school, and then that kind of got into um, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. There was a gym, like a yeah MMA Jiu-Jitsu gym, not too far from my house that I was training at for a little from probably started there when I was like 16. Yeah, up until I moved to Boston for university. Um, and it was hard. I mean, the to keep up with combat sports because my university didn't have wrestling. I really wanted to wrestle in university, but I wasn't able to. Um, but I found rugby. I played rugby for a little bit throughout university, like four years, and then uh, I don't know, like just started working and stuff after, and then kind of rekindled uh, the combat sports like bug in me when I was like probably 25, 26 or something. So a little bit out of university, I was like working. I was a teacher in Boston, like well, Boston area and then Boston public schools. Um, and I just like needed something to, I don't know, like ground me. It was just the work culture in America is really like you really kind of dive in and make your work really an integral thing, and it's hard um, to see yourself outside of that sometimes. And anyways, so it became a hobby, started as a hobby, and then like I found a Muay Thai gym in Boston, and I hadn't really even thought about fighting when I started there. Uh, it was one thing that had bugged me that when I was like a teenager training MMA that I was like right on that cusp of about to be a fighter, about to fight, and then had to move the other side of the country and just but it was kind of one thing that had been sticking with me of like, man, I really want to be able to do that. If I can do it just once, it'll be all right. But at first it was, or to when I restarted kind of my getting back into the combat sports realm, uh, it was mostly just for like fun exercise to have something to do. And then, one thing leads to another, and you're like, okay, so there's like the fight team practices. Okay, cool. If I can get invited to the fight team practices, like that would be awesome, right? And then you get to that level, and then now you're like, okay, well now I want to be like not feel like I'm drowning in sparring, I want to not be just getting whomped on all the time. So like now I want to be able to like hold myself. Okay, cool. Now I'm sparring with the other people who are like fighters, right? Who are like amateur fighters or whatever. Okay, cool. Well, let's do an amateur fight. Um, or actually in my case, it was like, let's go to Thailand. Let's check that out first. And then from here, then I started fighting. And then because I mean, I don't know, we talk about it right now, but of things that like bug me in like Western or especially like American like context around combat sports. But I feel like a lot of gatekeeping around fighting, which is like understandable, but also like annoying from the fighter's perspective. It makes it kind of makes it tough to start to break into that and move to that next level, that next progression. Anyways, but it's just those one thing after another, you just take one step and then you see, oh, this is the next step. And it's not that far away. I can get there. I've seen other people get there. So and that brings us to now, essentially just following that kind of path.
Well, it's a really cool answer though, champ, because it does show people that, when people see that you're at this high level now and everything that you're doing, everything you've achieved, everything that you will go on to achieve, it shows people, not to state the obvious, but obviously it wasn't always that way, but then it really breaks down the levels you had to get through. Now, I'll jump into Thailand, I'll jump into everything there. I have to ask one question though, just out of curiosity. You mentioned about playing rugby earlier. I mean, I've not heard that mentioned much in the States. Where I'm from, because I'm from the UK originally, I'm in Cyprus now, but where I'm from in Wales, rugby is like
Mm.
life. It's like but I've not heard that mentioned much in the States. How much rugby playing actually goes on in like the parts of the States you were in, or in the States in general?
Oh, I mean, it depends. So for me, like I found rugby in university, um, and like in the Northeast, like Boston area, like that whole kind of New England area, there's so many universities, and so there is kind of like a rugby culture, but it's not like, I mean, you think about like UK, Australia, anywhere where rugby is like a central sport, it's like that. And it's not so rugby a lot of the times in like American universities will be dudes who I don't know, maybe their school doesn't have like American football team, or maybe it does and it didn't like playing American football at a serious level didn't work out for them. For me when I was it was attractive to me because I think my school is like D4, it's like just club, not club level, but a little bit above club level. But it's really everybody's like balancing, you're a student first, and then it's like, okay, I got this other thing that I do for exercise to have a social life, all that stuff. Um, so there's that, but also, the US is a big diverse country. There's people from all over the world who come. So where I grew up, there are a lot of Pacific Islanders. So I went to high school with dudes who were playing rugby, but I had never like thought it wasn't in my like sphere of reference, like those dudes, because it was a thing in their community that like, oh, of course you're Samoan, like, you're gonna play rugby. Like that's the um but yeah, so in university is more common, I'd say, in the US. But like especially in like the Northeast, um, but also like Midwest, the universities in the Midwest probably have the best rugby teams, I'd say. Because again, that's where the best American football is probably. And so dudes who it doesn't work for them playing at that level American football end up going into rugby. So
There we go. There we go. Well, that's interesting. That's really, I was just curious about that. Coming back to the fight sports though, and the important things that you're known for. I mean, I love the diversity of your background, but when it comes into that, you said about um going over to Thailand, visiting Thailand. You mentioned that just now, and some of the differences with the American culture. So, in terms of the timeline of this, you live there now, as I understand it, but were you sort of going back and forth and going there for periods of time, like for training camps, then coming back to the US? Or how was your transition to living and fighting and working in Thailand in the beginning?
Yeah, so the first time I came here was 2018. Excuse me. And I spent 3 months out here. Initially, I planned to like split it up between like three different camps, in Bangkok, Hua Hin, and Chiang Mai. But I came here and just like stuck. It was just I found my groove over here. And had my first fights out here because kind of like what I was saying earlier about the gatekeeping that's kind of normal in American combat sports culture. Um, so, but here, especially my gym, Hong Kong Muay Thai, in Chiang Mai, it's like one thing that I really, really like about it is everybody fights, like, and it's not like you gotta be a fighter, it's just like, well, it's part of the sport. That's like how it, I mean, you can do it for fun, you can do it for fitness, it's great, but it's not seen as big of a leap to fight, it's just kind of a normal part of the experience of being involved in the sport. So um yeah, so anyway, sorry. And then I went back to the US, fought a little bit out there, a couple times amateur. And then I came back here December 2019. So right before COVID hit. And I had kind of planned that I was gonna like be here, maybe go back to the US for the summer for a couple months, work, save up money, come back here, hang out, coast off that, and kind of go on with that cycle. And then COVID hit and I just stayed here for COVID, which ended up being like a really good decision, I think. And I ended up getting a lot of opportunities just I mean honestly because just the pool of foreigners was smaller. Um and then yeah, I don't know, like COVID was a funny time, you could really kind of it gave a lot of people um permission to like reinvent themselves or reimagine what their lives could be like, And I think certainly for me it did. Um, and then so I just kind of decided I was going to stay out here. I don't think it was never really an active decision actually. But I was just really I still am, enjoying life out here and somehow making it work. And
Absolutely. Well, sorry to cut in there a minute, champ. I wanted to go a little bit deeper into that because it's so cool how that happened for you. And yeah, I mean, COVID did. I mean, it really it broke a lot of people out of the ruts, the situations they were just stuck in and everything, and gave people a chance to reevaluate. And the reason I want to go deeper into this is I think it's an important aspect of success, because when we look at your story, it's not just success in terms of winning fights and being a top fighter. It's also the fact that you're living there, you're living in Thailand and you're living your dream by the sound of it, you're living your lifestyle the way you want it to be, which a lot of people don't get the chance to do. So I'd like to get a little bit deeper into that in terms of like some of the cultural differences between like the US and Thailand. And it's not to say anywhere is better than anywhere else. It's just to say that, for different people, certain types of lifestyles suit better. And I'd like to get a little bit deeper into like the differences with the fighting side of things because you touched on that a couple of times with like the gym and everybody fights and not having the gatekeeping. But there's some big cultural differences when I speak to people out there in Thailand, with the actual ethos behind combat sports in general. So it's quite a big question, but maybe if we sort of narrow that down to a handful of topics about what you enjoy most about the culture in terms of the actual lifestyle, but in terms of the fight sports as well, those two sides, if that makes sense.
yeah, oh, where to even start about it? It's a really big topic to
The
tackle.
things that stood out to you, I think, is the things because obviously it's too big to get into everything. But I think if we look at like the things that because and it's different for different people as well. Different people will go over there and different things I think would stand out to them more than to like the next guy. But if we just keep it around you, the things that really resonated with you and you felt the most comfortable with, and things like that, I think that should narrow it down a little bit to maybe just a handful of topics. Sorry, it's a
Yeah.
big one, but it's a cool one as well.
I don't know. So one thing that kind of comes to my mind initially is the psychology around fighting is totally different in the US than here. I think like the culture around it actually is not very different from wrestling, from like high school wrestling or university wrestling in the US. I feel like people who want to get a kind of context and wrap their head around it who have never been to Thailand and never been um, exposed to like to Muay Thai here, the best way for them to understand it, especially from an American context, would be to think about like high school and university wrestling. Is you just have matches and matches and matches and matches, and you just compete and compete and compete and compete, and then so you'll meet lots of people out here with 200, 300, 400 fights, the trainers at gym, sometimes just like normal dudes. And but it's you're starting when you're 6, 7, 8, same way as like any sport in the US, like I was saying, like when I was playing baseball, that age. um and you just like compete and compete and compete, and you don't, I mean, people kind of like they track the amount of fights that they have. They don't track how many you win, how many you lose, how many, and it's funny when you watch the some of the like the entertainment Muay Thai promotions with like that feature like foreigners versus Thais, that are like televised or whatever, and they'll have the little blurb about them of like what your record is and where you're from and all that. Those numbers are all almost always made up. They'll just say like, oh, let's just say he has 40 fights. Let's just say he is like he's 32 and 7 and 1 or something like that. And the dude it might be his like eighth fight. It might be his 10th fight, when you're talking about foreigners. And then you'll have maybe they'll be fighting a Thai guy, and they'll say, okay, well, let's make the statist like the records look like they're kind of matched evenly. So we'll say the dude has 50 fights and 37 wins and 12 losses and a draw or something. But that guy really has 300 fights, because now he's 23 and he's been doing it since he was 7. Um, so and that and verse so you got that where it's kind of just about, like I was saying before, it's what you do as part of is being involved in the sport. And also it's a way that people make money here. It's like really about the money for a lot of people. Um, and Westerners not, don't kind of come from that context. Okay, so we got that versus kind of the American style where people end up being really concerned with their records and kind of also end up thinking that like the fight is this big how could we say it, like reflection on who you are as a person, that like that your conception of self really rides on winning or losing this fight. um and I think that's like a product also of this like modern contemporary era of fighting in the US, because I don't think it didn't used to always be like that in America. It used to have boxers in like the 30s, 40s, 50s, and up until like 70s and 80s, really, with who would usually break like 100 fights. Like those, the think about like I don't know, like Joe Lewis must have had over 100 fights. Like, and it was just, but it was normal. It was the um because well, also in that time they were also doing it very similar to here, where it's like that's how we make money. We gotta get paid somehow. We gotta put food on the table, and so let's fight to do that. So um yeah, and I mean, yeah, and versus like you think about today, you think about like somebody like Floyd Mayweather, who's really had such a big impact on not only boxing culture but just fight sports culture in America, period. And how big of a part of his lore, his promotion, that undefeated thing was, and thus how like that how impactful that was in the culture and the psychology of fighting in the US, you know. So that's a big difference of the fight being this I wish I had the word for it right now. But this big pivotal thing, you know, in your life and in your conception of yourself and really your success, you know, and how you live your life versus it's like you fight because this is what we do, you know. It's like it's just part of the rhythm of our lives, you know. Um, that
Wow, I love that. I love that description. I mean, it's really, I've heard that described, and it's something that fascinates me as well with the whole East and West thing. And it's, it's such a different outlook on life in general, but in terms of combat sports, and it's a really good description you gave of that. So, okay, so honing back in on yourself more personally for a moment with this, in terms of your career now. Another big-ish sort of question for you, but yeah, well, I don't know, we'll see. But anyway, out of the fights you've had so far, I mean, I would love to talk about so many different ones and everything, but obviously for time with these interviews, we always have to narrow it down. So the way I usually narrow it down for people is to talk about their favorite ones. So in your case, your favorite fights for whichever reason. And again, I know it's a big question, but usually people can manage to narrow this down to like I don't know, three, four, five key ones that stand out. Whether it's the fight itself, sometimes it's something else. It's about the location or it's about some other experience they had around it. So it's not really just like what you were saying there. It's not really, I won this one amazingly or I lost this one or what. It can be other things around it. But basically, when you look back on your career so far, your proudest moments, your favorite moments in terms of specific fights would be a really good one to get into, please.
oh man, that's a great question. Um, and you know, I think about like so we could talk about like favorite but also like most impactful, you know, I feel like is pretty important. Um, because some of the fights that were most impactful for me were not like the most enjoyable experiences, you know, but they ended up being maybe like points of reference that really helped me later on in fighting. So I can talk about the first time I fought on TV. Um, on Muay Thai Super Champ. This was like in 20 right before COVID, like 2020 or something. Um, and I just got mollywopped, bro. I got whooped so bad. I thought I was gonna die, man. It was bad. Um, by this trainer from FA Group. Um, I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on his name. But anyway, so you know, I think like having an experience like that where you really see the depth, you know, see how deep the water goes, is really important for a fighter, especially coming up, you know. Um, to yeah, to that also is a point of comparison for later when you're fighting of like, okay, it's probably not going to be as bad as that. You know, I don't know if I can get worse than that. So like helping you calm your nerves when you're leading up to another fight, you know, I think it's really useful to have. I don't want to say like a low point, you know, but to really realize like of man, I've gotten beaten bad and I've survived it, you know, and I've come back and here I am still, you know. Um that was a funny one also because it was right before COVID. So when I think I fought in like February or something, and then they shut down in March. And then so they were playing on, you know, it was a weekly show that was televised. And then so after the shutdown, they would just keep on playing fights and highlights and stuff. And it was like every day, or not every day, but every week for a good couple of months, 4, 5, 6 months, I was just getting my ass whooped on national TV, like over and over again. And I'd be maybe at a bar or a restaurant or something on Saturday night when they would play or Sunday night or whenever they would play Super Champ. And I'd look up and I'm like, oh, damn, I'm just getting worked on right there, huh? So that was like a funny experience, like very like grounding and, I guess humility building experience. Uh so that was so there's that. I mean, the first Saenchai fight was like really something else, for a lot of different reasons. And it really that one really kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say, yeah, just help build my profile, I would say, and it's something that a lot of people know me for is having fought Saenchai. But that first time was so Thai Fight is an awesome promotion. uh Really I mean, they got their roster of guys who are, it's also probably the second or third most viewed promotion in the country. And it's really high production value, and it travels all over the country. So you go to these not little towns, but like really where you would not normally go as a Westerner, So the first time that I fought Saenchai, we fought in Nan, which is a province in like the northeast. It's on the border with Laos. Um, and they set up in like the middle of like a park in the city, and there were, I don't know, man, 3, 4, 5,000 people there. Um, and there's giant like giant screens with where they'll show the highlights or the dude's faces or whatever, and there's just a lot of pomp and circumstance built around it. So to go into that, and it's like you're I want to say like a Christian being fed to the lions in the Colosseum, like what everybody is there to see. um and it's a pretty crazy feeling. So there's to have all those eyes kind of on you, but also not on you, because they're watching him, and you are just kind of coincidental that you're there. They want to see him perform. um so, which is a funny thing to think about. I think it takes off the pressure a little bit when you're like, nobody's really watching me. uh but that time specifically was pretty intense. So because there have been kind of periodic shutdowns in Thailand, they would open things up and they would have some fights, and then there would be another wave of COVID cases rising, so they would close everything, and that kind of happened a couple times. And so originally, I think we fought in April 21. Does that sound right? Yeah, I think so. Um, So there, yeah, but before that, we had supposed to had fought, I think like one time on Christmas Eve, and then I was like 1 or 2 days. It was 1 or 2 days before the weigh-in, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, everything's closed because of COVID again." And then I think there was another time before that too. So I like had this feeling like, is this ever really going to happen? It's already been canceled twice, like right before it was supposed to happen. Um, we're in the we're in this park in Non. Um, Backstage, everybody's together because that's just the kind of the Muay Thai style. You don't have like your red corner room and your blue corner room. You don't see, it's like we're sitting like right next to each other. We're like, we're warming up right next to each other. Everybody sees everybody. And then a giant thunderstorm happens. And like and now I'm thinking like, oh my God, this is just, again, it's just not going to happen. The universe just doesn't want this to happen, which is kind of comforting. I was like, oh, okay, I'll just go home and just have a hot cocoa or something. This will be fine. I came and I did my best, and it just didn't happen. Um, but anyway, so we ended up fighting. But then just being backstage at a thing like that. So like I was saying, it's like they got their roster of guys, and then they just, people want to see those fighters perform. And then they're like, let's get some foreigners, like, and let's just like for our dudes to demonstrate how good they are. So you're sitting backstage. You're not backstage. You're sitting in a tent outside behind the screens and where all the audience is, and it's muddy. There's dudes coming back, like limping, all cut up. Some dudes get knocked out and get carried to like a table, and it feels like a field hospital and, outside of a combat zone or something like that. And the whole time you're just like looking, you're like, whew, hope I don't end up like that guy. Like, so I better fight back. Um, so that was like, yeah, that whole experience was just so wild. The second time we fought, it was just a little bit more. It was cool too, it was great. It was big, also a big production, but we were in Bangkok. Um, and so it didn't have that like uh everything is a bit felt a bit more polished, I'll say. Um, and so that some of that stuff where it's just like you're shadow boxing to warm up, but your like feet are getting caught in the mud. Um, those types of like experiences are what you get like when you're outside of the city, and you're kind of at more rural areas. Um, yeah, those there's tons, man. I mean, that's what for me the sport, it's about making the memories, because you're not going to get rich off of it, So you got to chase the memories.
Absolutely. That is wild. I mean, fair play to you. That is, I knew it would be a cool story behind that, but that was something else. So, okay. I love asking that question because you never know what's going to come back. You never know which ones are the ones that have stayed with that person the most. And it's often, it's not always their biggest fights as well. I was hoping the Saenchai fight would come up. I mean, it's an amazing story. It's how I heard about you as well, to be totally honest. But at the same time, it's incredible to hear that. Now, you mentioned something else there, though. I mean, you mentioned about the pressure, and you mentioned about like that feeling of the thunderstorm and maybe I can just go home and all this type of thing. And that's something that fascinates me about the whole fighting side of things is the mental strength you have to have as well as the physical strength. And I'm curious about how you um I mean, I heard what you said earlier about, that time on TV, and you were like, okay, it can never get as bad as that, and that took some of the nerves out. But generally speaking, how do you stay like cool? How do you stay calm? I mean, especially with like what you were saying just then, with guys coming in and being laid out on tables and all this type of thing. And I was thinking, man, this sounds like a Vietnam movie I've seen or something. It sounds like really. But obviously in that situation, you're seeing that, and you've got to be like, okay, I know I can do this. And I think that takes a special type of strength, to be honest with you, inside you, as well as obviously the physical strength and skill that you have to have. How do you personally cultivate that, or basically, what are your methods for handling the nerves that people feel?
Yeah, man, that's a fun one to think about or talk about because the nerves don't go away. That's the thing. Any fighter will tell you like the nerves don't go away. You just kind of get better at dealing with them, or it becomes more familiar. It's not something new anymore. I remember like kind of earlier, I guess, in my career, like the worst time also is when like the 30 minutes before you got to leave your house or your hotel room or whatever to go fight. That's the worst time. Um, Once you're there at the stadium or whatever, it's I feel like it disintegrates a lot for me because you're just like, oh, okay, well, this is just part of the part of what it is. There's people here to watch, there's people here to fight and be watched. And we're all kind of like playing our roles in this thing. um but yeah, that like the little bit of time before you leave the house to the apartment sucks. But like I said, you get better at dealing with it, it becomes more normal. um I also think like a big part of it is just that you do it for the people around you. Not so like how to exactly say it. Well, you got to represent your team. You got to represent your people. You got to like somebody talk to the promoter, somebody vouch for you. And so you showing up and being a professional, and also that means like making weight if you got to make weight. Um, but showing up and being ready to fight and fighting and performing. But like somebody vouched for you to do that. And so the way I think about it is like I'm not going to let down the people who believe in me, who've put out their word, their reputation for me. um as much as like sometimes you think like would it really even be the braver thing to just like fuck off out of here and not do this, you know, and like break the expectations of everybody. Um, which I don't think it would be, you know. But you know, you always have that like little voice in your head, you know, maybe you're like riding your motorbike to the stadium and you're like, oh man, what if somebody just sideswipes me right now? Then I wouldn't have to fight, huh? Um, but also it's never as bad as you think it is, you know, it's never like the whole fight experience itself is never really as bad as you kind of work it up to be in your mind, you know. Um, Yeah, and it's always like, yeah, and I think the more you do it, and also the more frequently you do it, that's another thing about why I like being here for the sport. Is like the just the frequency that you get to fight, you know, it's not uncommon to like, I think my goal for this year is to be able to fight 10 times, which I think is a pretty reasonable goal as far as like, you know, there's people who get 20 fights in a year, you know, there's people who are really active, like a lot of the dudes who just fight around like the local stadiums, like they'll be fighting like every week, you know? So we're thinking like they'll get like 30, 40 fights in a year, you know? Um, and so that's also kind of, it also ties back to what I was saying earlier about the difference in psychology between here where it's like you fight because that's just kind of the part of the rhythm of our lives as people who do this, you know, um, versus in America where it's there's almost this like judgment on you as an individual that's tied to the outcome of that fight, you know. Um, so yeah, like I said, like that makes it easier here psychologically too. Of once you realize that it's just we do it because it's part of the rhythm of our lives and what we do, you know.
Yeah, I mean it makes a lot of sense, and I've got to say that obviously the whole thing about it being a rhythm and it being part of your life and everything. I mean, it sounds a lot. Every time I hear it, it sounds a lot healthier than like pinning your whole self-esteem on winning or losing. And I'm not going to get into that because different people will have different viewpoints, and some people will say, "Oh yeah, but that other way, it gets results," and maybe it does. But I don't know. I think it can affect people. Anyway, but that's an interesting one because the nerves and everything. I mean, in my time as well, doing like the media and doing this type of thing, I've been in a lot of dressing rooms and and things before boxing or before kickboxing or MMA, and the atmosphere in there it can be electric. I mean, you walk in, you can feel like God, and I'm just curious. It fascinates me to no end how people handle that. So that's pretty cool. Now, a couple of other things with this. We mentioned earlier about, you being on national TV and you being, being whooped and all this type of thing, and you were very humble about that and everything. I mean, that's brave in itself to sit in a bar and watch, watch that happen. But if we flip that on its head and we look at like what you regard to be some of your best performances in terms of, and I am looking at the performance aspect of it now, where you won the fight or the fight went really well. You come out of the ring afterwards and you think, things went to plan there, because I know a lot of times they don't go to plan and a lot of times you have to adapt. But certain if there's certain maybe one or two performances, key ones, where you walked out and you thought, yeah, my game plan was on point there, that went the way I wanted it to go, and you're basically proud of that performance more than other ones, and it's basically what I said earlier, but flipping it on its head, rather than what you learned from the ones that went didn't go so well, what you learned from the ones that did go bang on what you were aiming for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think like oh, let me see, second or third time I fought on TV on Muay Hardcore, I won by knockout like in the second round. Um, that feels good, man. Like knocking somebody out on TV feels really good. And like in a reel where you're just like you're both kind of just going at it and swinging, you know. Um, that yeah, that's a good feeling with the camera in your face, you know, and the referee raising your hand like that. Yeah, but also like a lot of the times the fights that I'm proud of, um, or that I feel good about, you know, maybe you don't even win, but you like you show that you're about it, you know, you show that you're like you belong there, and that you did good. Maybe you get knocked out, but you go out on your shield, that you go out swinging. Um, and those are better than if you fight a dude locally who's like not in shape, who's just doing it just to get a little bit of money extra. Um, like a lot of the local stadiums, like especially coming here to Thailand, a lot of your earlier fights are kind of going to be like that. Um, which is fair, because you don't want to throw somebody with like one fight, two fights, or their first fight into the deep end and just see them get like shredded or real, hurt. So you gotta there's like, there's levels to who you're gonna fight, right? Um, and then if you're fighting in kind of a local scene like in Chiang Mai or maybe in like Isan or the South, anywhere outside of like the big stadiums, um, in Bangkok, it can really be a grab bag of who you're gonna end up fighting. You can fight dudes who are exact the same caliber that you would fight at Rajdaman or Lumpini, Um, or you can fight a Muay Thai trainer. You'll say like, the parlance would be like a tuk-tuk driver or something like that, right? But usually it's like a Muay Thai trainer, but who's just like, but he's not like trained, he's training other people and he's just doing it for a little something on the side. He's not like living the fighter life, or well, he is in a sense, but he's not preparing for that fight like you would in a serious like something at Lumpini or whatever. Um, and yeah, so when you're fighting here, like a lot of the times locally, you don't really know what you'll get um, on that particular night, who's going to be in the ring with you. Uh, so anyway, so like I was saying, like fighting a dude where it's really good, maybe he's like just a little bit better than you, but you can keep up with him, and you can trade with him and like, but he wins, but you put on the good performance. It's so much more satisfying than than steamrolling somebody who's like heart isn't in it, or who hasn't been preparing for it.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get where you're coming from there. And again, I think it's a healthier attitude to it, to be honest. I mean, you see a lot of it nowadays with fighters where they build up. I mean, it happens a lot in pro boxing in particular, but they build up these records of like 20 undefeated or 25 undefeated. But you look at the records and you look at who they've been in there with, and the people have been inactive, or they've lost more than they've won, and they've done this, they've done that, and you just think, well, is that really, what it's all about? Whereas, yeah, what you're saying, going toe to toe with someone, and even if it doesn't go to plan, you've given it your best. I mean, it's very much, I like that, and it's part of the reason I follow, well, everything in Thailand so much is because it's very much more about the inner journey than about like how it appears to be for other people. I mean, from my perception. Anyway, so a couple of other things. I mean, we're doing well with this type of thing. So a couple of other things to talk about. Obviously, your future plans. I mean, you mentioned then that you want to fight 10. I think you said 10 times this year and everything, but how far ahead in time do you sort of map your journey? Because going back to what we were saying earlier, I mean, you ended up in Thailand. You didn't know you were going to stay there. You stayed there from fate or whatever you want to call it. I think these things often happen for a reason. But however you interpret that, you ended up staying there without the plan. So how far ahead do you plan? Like, going to have 10 fights this year. Do you plan like next year as well, or are you just sort of rolling with what happens? Because you're very laid back and easygoing, so I can imagine you rolling with, when the fights come. But I'm curious as to how far ahead you do plan things.
Yeah, man, it's and this is a great question to ask any fighter also. Um, but yeah, I don't plan too much. I got my little goals, I'd like to like for the year I'd like to fight 10 times. I'd like to get up to like it sounds ambitious, but it's not that ambitious, but 50 fights before I retire. And then again, like I was saying before, if like you always get to that thing and then you're like, okay, well, what's the next one, right? Because like before it was 20, before yeah, 20 fights, and then you get to 20 fights and you're like, okay, well, yeah, let's do 50 then. Let's go for 50. And then maybe you get to 50 and you're like, well, okay, we could do 100 if we can get to 50, right? Um, so we'll see like where I end up with that. But I think so. Yeah, like I said, my goals really for this year, like 10 fights would be cool if I don't get injured too bad or nothing happens. Get to 50 fights before I get too old. I'm 33. I'm about to be 34 in April. Um, so it's a sport. It's a young man sport. I'm older than a lot of guys who are here, especially a lot of Thai guys. Like I was saying, you start at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So you're retired. You'll retire from really fighting from by the time you're in your early 20s. For a lot of people, or I mean, well, there's like Saenchai. He's older than 40. Maybe he's 41 or 42 now. But Saenchai is Saenchai for a reason. Um, but then, I meet lots of people out here who are older than me and still pushing, man. So yeah, hard to say. I want to always try to remember not to like sell myself short and talk down to myself. Because I used to say like I'm gonna be done by 35. Uh, but now I'm looking at 34 and I'm like, I probably got another little bit in me, and so um, but again, it's a dangerous sport, and like head trauma is real and the effects of that are real. So that's like always something that you gotta like weigh on your mind, because you got the rest of your life after this to think about. Um, yeah, and then I mean, because also, so now I'm married, and we have kids, and so thinking about that too, is another part of the calculus for my career and how I relate to the sport. Um, and what's going on with like, yeah, what my wife wants to do, what stage in growing up and developing our kids are at, and like where's the best place for them, what's the best context for them to do that, and what are, and sometimes that means sacrifices from the parents, because you're a family, you're a unit, and you got to look out for everybody. Um, yeah, it's a lot easier. The sport's a lot easier when you're younger without any attachments. It's a young man sport.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, nonetheless, I mean, I'm sure that having a few more years ahead of you is absolutely. I mean, you are very humble like that. That's the impression I've got. I mean, you've achieved some big things, but you're very humble about it. So I'm sure there's a lot of good things yet to come. But the family side of things, yeah, man. I mean, it's the ultimate blessing in life, really. So have to be there with that. I mean, do, how do they feel? I hope you don't mind me asking this, but your wife and your kids, they watch you fight, I'm guessing. Do they like worry for you about that? I mean, obviously they believe in what you can achieve, but again, from being around the fight game, it's something else I've seen where like I'm ringside doing whatever I'm doing and somebody's fighting and their partners like in the front row or whatever. And sometimes what they go through, even when they really believe in their partner or their husband or whoever it is, they go through a real emotional roller coaster as anybody would. I mean, if you don't, because I don't get into people's personal lives, obviously, but just as from a fight perspective, does she come and watch you fight, and does she worry for you like that?
Yeah, sometimes I mean now that we got like the kids, so a lot of the times now I'm like off on my own more because it also gets expensive. You gotta go to Bangkok it would be great because my wife's from Bangkok, and so we can go and like be with family and stuff like that, but it's expensive. You gotta buy 4 plane tickets, 4 bus tickets, back and forth instead of just one, right? So it's um but yeah, they do worry for me. I think it's pretty common for fighters that like you get worried, or like people, not even fighters, but just people involved in the sport, that you get more worried for people you care about fighting than you do when you're actually doing it. Um, and yeah, so sometimes like I've gotten comments from the kids of like, oh, don't go fight because I don't want to see you get hurt or whatever. I'm like, oh, but I'll be all right, dude. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. I'll be all right. Um, but yeah, It is an unfortunate thing though of and that I think adds a lot of stress for the fighter of being like of having to know that other people are worried about you, you know? Because you're not really worried about yourself. I get, like there's a rational part of your brain that says that knows that like, yeah, it's a risky thing. But your normal just working brain is like, well, this is just like what we do, you know. It's like it's all in the game. But then now you got to add on of like, oh, but I don't want my people worried about me. I'm trying to comfort. I'm telling my people it's going to be okay. Don't worry about that. And it does it like, unfortunately, it ends up adding a bit more weight to what you got to deal with. But it's also you get used to it. These are your people. You're always with them. So, and I mean, that's also part of like being community, having family, right? Is supporting each other. So it ends up also, like I was saying, just being part of that rhythm of life, that rhythm of being in a family. Um, yeah, that's what comes with it.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Well, I like that. I just wanted to ask that as one of the final things for showing the human side, basically more of the human side than. I mean, other fighters will know this, but especially when people watch guys on TV and everything, it's very easy to sort of I wouldn't say dehumanize, but it's very easy to see them just as a fighter, and not as like the family and the other things people go through. So I sort of was thinking of that from that context. Well, I mean, we've talked about some good things. I'm sure with your life, we've only scratched the surface of this, but nonetheless, it's good because I had that like those two aims basically of like some fun stories from your fights and a few sort of life lessons or things you've learned along the way. And we've ticked those two boxes, but I appreciate it, man. I mean, it was really fun, actually.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so fun.
You're a good storyteller, and you should definitely, I don't know, maybe after fighting or something like that, look into doing some type of presenting or some type of, I don't know, interviewing fighters or even if you're training fighters, I can imagine you making it like a really fun environment for like training them or anything like that, with the way you tell stories and things like that today. It's really cool, really, really cool. So. Thank you again. Thank you for your time. I will be cheering for you in those future fights as well. And I'll say to our audience as well, so I don't forget, follow what Seth is doing as well. Doing some very exciting things, guys. You heard it first with the fights coming up. So he's out there. He's on Instagram. Just put Seth Grande into Google, and you can plug into what he's doing. So I give that a quick mention as well. But yeah, thank you, man. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great evening. Best wishes to your family, and yeah, just thank you for everything you shared today. Basically, it's been awesome.
Oh, thank you, man. This is a pleasure. It was really fun.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.